August 31st, 1997, 10:30 p.m. Princess Diana's last phone call from her hotel room in Paris lasted only 8 minutes. The person on the other end had been her closest ally for years, but the truth Diana discovered that night shook her to her core. "Was it you? All this time, was it you?" she whispered, and the silence from the other end of the line explained everything. The Ritz Hotel in Paris was quieter than usual for a Saturday evening. Most of the paparazzi had retreated after hours of waiting, though a few persistent photographers still lingered in the lobby and outside the building. In Suite 102, Princess Diana sat by the window overlooking Place Vendôme, watching the occasional flash of camera bulbs pierce the darkness below. She had spent the day with Dodi Al-Fayed, touring Paris and trying to escape the relentless attention that followed her everywhere. But tonight felt different. Tonight she felt an overwhelming need to call someone she trusted, someone who had been her confidant through the most turbulent years of her life. Diana reached for the secure phone line that had been installed in her suite. Her fingers hesitated over the numbers. Malcolm Sterling had been more than just her private security advisor. He had been her anchor in the storm of royal life for nearly a decade. When the marriage to Charles crumbled, when the media scrutiny became unbearable, when she needed someone who understood the impossible pressures of her position, Malcolm had always been there. She had met Malcolm in 1988, shortly after Harry's birth, when her marriage was already showing serious cracks. He had been recommended by a mutual friend as someone who could help navigate the increasingly complex security challenges that came with her growing independence from royal protocol. Over the years, their relationship had evolved from professional to deeply personal, with Malcolm becoming the closest thing she had to a trusted confidant. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered. "Diana, is everything all right?" "It's quite late." There was something in his tone that immediately struck her as odd. Not concern exactly, but something more calculating. She had become adept at reading voices over the years, a skill developed from countless phone interviews and conversations with people who wanted something from her. "Malcolm, I need to talk to someone I trust. Paris has been," she paused, choosing her words carefully even though this was supposed to be a secure line. "Complicated. Of course, you know you can always count on me. What's troubling you?" Diana walked to the window, watching the street below. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened over the past few years. The leaked stories, the photographs, the way certain information always seemed to find its way to the press at exactly the wrong moment." What Diana was about to reveal would destroy everything she thought she knew about trust. There was a brief silence on the other end. "The media can be ruthless, as you well know." "Yes, but Malcolm, some of these leaks, they came from information that only a handful of people knew. Private conversations, personal plans, even my movements on supposedly secret trips." Malcolm's voice remained steady, but Diana detected a subtle change in his breathing. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm trying to understand something that's been bothering me." Diana moved away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you remember when I told you about my plans to visit the landmine victims in Angola? I shared that with you 3 weeks before we announced it publicly." "I remember. The Daily Telegraph ran a story about it the next day. A very detailed story that included not just the fact that I was planning the trip, but specific details about which areas I intended to visit, which organizations I planned to work with, details I had only shared with you." The silence stretched longer this time. Diana felt her heart beginning to race. For months, Diana had been documenting something that would terrify any public figure. "Diana, you're under enormous stress. The press has many sources. Stop." Diana's voice was sharp. "Just stop for a moment and listen to me, Malcolm. I've been doing some thinking, some research. I've been tracking the timeline of certain leaks, certain stories that appeared in the press." She reached for a leather notebook she had been keeping, filled with dates, newspaper clippings, and notes. For months, she had been documenting a pattern that had slowly been emerging. The story about my relationship with Hasnat Khan, the details about our private dinners, the gifts I gave him, even the pet names we used for each other. Information that only 3 people in the world knew: Hasnat, myself, and you. The relationship with Hasnat had been deeply private, conducted largely in secret over the course of 2 years. They had met at the Royal Brompton Hospital, where he worked as a heart surgeon, and Diana had been immediately drawn to his intelligence and complete disregard for her royal status. "Diana, I think you're becoming paranoid." "Am I?" "Because I also have the story about my secret meeting with Nelson Mandela's representatives. The one where I discussed my plans to become more involved in international humanitarian work after the divorce." That meeting was so confidential that I didn't even tell my own staff. Only you knew about it, Malcolm. Only you. Diana's hands were trembling now as she flipped through her notebook. Each entry represented a betrayal, a moment when her trust had been violated, her privacy invaded. What Diana discovered next would prove her worst fears were justified. The photographs of me at the gym, the ones taken from an angle that suggested the photographer was positioned exactly where you had suggested I park my car. The stories about my therapy sessions, including quotes that were remarkably close to things I had confided in you during our private conversations. Malcolm's voice had lost its warm, protective tone. You're upset, Diana. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Diana stood up, pacing the length of the hotel room. I trusted you with everything, Malcolm. My fears about the royal family, my concerns about my son's safety, my plans for the future, and every single time I shared something significant with you, it somehow found its way into the press. You're imagining connections that don't exist. Am I? Because I have something else, Malcolm. Something I haven't told you about. Diana walked to her suitcase and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were photographs and documents that had been quietly gathered by a private investigator she had hired without telling anyone, including Malcolm. I hired someone to look into the financial records of several journalists who have been writing stories about my private life. Very detailed, very accurate stories. Do you know what they found? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The next words Diana spoke would shatter a decade of trust. Payments, Malcolm. Regular payments from a Swiss bank account registered to a company called Sterling Advisory Services. Your company. Diana heard a sharp intake of breath. Diana, I can explain. Can you explain why you've been taking money to betray me? Can you explain why the man I trusted to protect my privacy has been selling my secrets for years? It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Diana's voice rose, all pretense of calm gone. Tell me why the person I confided in about my deepest fears, my most private moments, my children's welfare, has been profiting from my pain. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Malcolm finally spoke, his voice was different. Colder. The mask of loyalty and protection had finally slipped. You don't understand the pressures involved, Diana. The offers that were made, the threats that came with refusing them. Threats? From whom? Malcolm's next words would reveal the true scope of the forces working against Diana. There are people, Diana, powerful people who have a vested interest in controlling the narrative around the royal family. When your marriage began falling apart, when you started becoming more independent, more outspoken about issues that made certain people uncomfortable, you were paid to spy on me. I was paid to manage the situation, to ensure that information flowed in ways that could be controlled, contained. Better that I be the source than someone who might be less careful about what they revealed. Diana felt sick. Less careful? Malcolm, you sold stories about my eating disorder. You leaked information about my therapy sessions. You told them about my relationship with my children when I was trying to protect William and Harry from the worst of the media scrutiny. I tried to protect you as much as I could. You tried to protect yourself. You took money to betray someone who trusted you completely. Diana's voice was shaking with anger and hurt. How long, Malcolm? How long has this been going on? Another long pause. Since 1988. What Malcolm revealed next would show Diana that her entire support system had been a lie. The number hit Diana like a physical blow. Almost 10 years. Nearly their entire relationship had been built on lies and betrayal. Since 1988, she repeated slowly. Since right after Harry was born. Since the time when my marriage was falling apart and I was at my most vulnerable. Diana, please understand. I understand perfectly. Diana's voice was cold now, controlled. I understand that when I needed someone most, when I was drowning in an impossible situation, you saw an opportunity to profit from my misery. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Tell me, Malcolm, when I called you crying after those photos of me at the gym were published, when I told you how violated I felt, how exposed, were you already counting the money you had made from giving them the information they needed to take those pictures? Diana's next questions would cut to the heart of Malcolm's betrayal. When I confided in you about my fears that Charles was trying to have me monitored, when I told you I was worried about my safety, were you already planning which details to sell to the highest bidder? I never sold anything that would compromise your safety, didn't you? Because according to my research, you provided information about my travel plans, my security arrangements, my daily routines. You told them where I would be and when, How is that not compromising my safety? Malcolm's composure was cracking. There were protocols, safeguards. Whose protocols? Whose safeguards? The same people who were paying you to spy on me? Diana, you have to understand, the situation was impossible. If I hadn't been the source, they would have found other ways to get the information. At least this way, I could control what was revealed. Control what was revealed. Diana's voice was incredulous. Malcolm, they knew everything. My medical appointments, my charitable work, my personal relationships, my conversations with my children. What exactly did you control? Malcolm's admission would reveal the terrifying extent of Diana's monitored life. I kept them from learning about certain things. What things? Malcolm hesitated. Your plans to leave England, your discussions with American media outlets about a tell-all interview, your meeting with that film producer about a documentary. Diana felt her blood run cold. Those were plans she had barely formed herself, ideas she had only begun to explore. The fact that Malcolm knew about them meant he had been monitoring her even more closely than she had realized. You've been spying on me beyond what I told you directly. You've been tracking my movements, monitoring my communications, reporting on activities I never shared with you. It was necessary. For whom? Necessary for whom, Malcolm? For people who have a legitimate interest in maintaining stability. Say their names. Diana, I can't. Say their names. Diana was shouting now. Tell me who has been paying you to betray me for almost 10 years. I can't give you specific names, but there are elements within the royal household, within the government, within the media establishment, who work together to what? To control me? To manipulate me? To destroy me? Diana's last question would haunt Malcolm Sterling forever. To manage the situation, to prevent damage to institutions that are bigger than any one person. Diana laughed, but there was no humor in it. Institutions that are more important than human beings. More important than a woman trying to raise her children, trying to find her place in the world, trying to do some good despite impossible circumstances. Diana, please. More important than the truth. She walked back to the window, looking down at the street where photographers still waited. How many of them were there because Malcolm had told them where to find her? Was tonight planned, Malcolm? This trip to Paris, my dinner with Dodie, our route back to the hotel? Did you tell them about all of that too? Diana, you're scaring me now. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that I've been a fool. I'm thinking that the person I trusted most in the world has been working for my enemies for years. I'm thinking that every private moment I thought I had, every secret I thought I was keeping, every plan I thought was confidential, has been commodified and sold. Diana closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of the betrayal settling over her. When I told you about my bulimia, when I shared with you how ashamed I felt, how isolated, did you include those details in your next report? Diana, please stop. When I told you about my fears that Charles would try to take my children away from me, when I confided my terror that I might lose William and Harry, did you write that down for your handlers? I tried to protect you. You protected yourself. You protected your income. You protected your position with people who saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a human being to be helped. Diana opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the window. The woman looking back seemed older than her 36 years, marked by betrayals and disappointments that no one should have to endure. Malcolm, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth. What? Are there plans? Active plans involving me? Plans that go beyond just monitoring and reporting? The silence that followed was the longest yet. When Malcolm finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Diana, I think you should come home. I think you should cut this trip short and return to London where we can ensure your safety. That's not an answer to my question. It's the only answer I can give you. Diana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the hotel room. That's all I needed to know. Diana, wait. Goodbye, Malcolm. After 10 years of lies, I think we've said everything we need to say to each other. Diana, please don't hang up. There are things you don't understand. Complexities to this situation that, was it you? All this time, was it you? The question hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of years of misplaced trust, of a friendship that had never been real, of a protector who had been the source of the very threats he claimed to be guarding against. When Malcolm didn't answer, Diana quietly hung up the phone. She sat in the silence of the hotel room for a long time, processing the conversation, understanding finally that she had been alone in ways she had never imagined. The person she had trusted most had been working for people who saw her as an obstacle to be removed or a resource to be exploited. Diana picked up her notebook and made one final entry. August 31st, 1997, 10:38 p.m. Confirmed what I suspected. Malcolm Sterling has been compromised for years. Trust no one. Protect the boys. Find a way to tell the truth. She closed the notebook and placed it in her purse. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the clarity that came from finally understanding who her real enemies were. At 10:45 p.m., Diana left her hotel room to join Dodi for what would be their final journey together. As their car pulled away from the Ritz Hotel, she had no way of knowing that Malcolm Sterling was already making phone calls to his handlers, reporting on their conversation and its implications. The last phone call of Princess Diana's life had revealed a truth that was both devastating and liberating. She had learned that her greatest protector had been her greatest betrayer, but she had also learned that her instincts about the forces working against her had been correct all along. In the end, Diana's final conversation was not with someone who loved her, but with someone who had profited from her pain. It was a fitting, if tragic, end to a life that had been marked by the tension between public adoration and private betrayal. The truth about Malcolm Sterling's decade-long deception would die with Diana in the tunnel beneath the Pont de l'Alma. But the notebook she carried that night, filled with evidence of the systematic betrayal she had endured, would eventually find its way to people who understood its significance. Years later, when investigators began piecing together the complex web of interests that had surrounded Diana's final years, they would discover that her paranoia had been justified, her fears well-founded, and her isolation more complete than anyone had imagined. The woman who had been called paranoid for suspecting betrayal had been right all along. The people she trusted most had been working for those who wanted to control her, diminish her, or remove her from the equation entirely. Malcolm Sterling would live with the weight of that final conversation for the rest of his life, knowing that his last words to Diana had been lies, and that she had died knowing the truth about his betrayal. The money he had earned from selling her secrets would never be enough to buy back the trust he had destroyed, or to erase the memory of her voice asking, "Was it you? All this time, was it you?" The silence that had followed that question would echo in his mind forever, a reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those we trust most, and that the price of that betrayal is measured not just in money, but in human lives and broken hearts.